If you're sitting there in your whitey tighties wondering just how much time you can save in the kitchen by cutting vegetables the right way, well, you, my friend, you're in the right spot. Not just because you're cozy. You're about to learn how I've cut a few common vegetables 10,000 times each back when I was a chef in the US Coast Guard. I'll walk you step by step how to cut an onion, celery, carrot, and a bell pepper. If you learned something from this video, give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Helps me out a lot. I'll show you how to cut an onion first. So for purposes of this demonstration, we're gonna call this end right here with the tail end, and this end right here, we're just gonna call it the root end, because this is how an onion grows out of, right? So to do this properly, regardless of what you're cutting, you need a sharp knife, right? We're gonna cut off the tail end first, and before we even cut the onion, I'm gonna just teach you some really basic knife 101 skills. The way I learned in culinary school, you always keep the tip of your knife on the cutting board, and you're gonna go in a rocking motion. And see what I'm doing right now? The tip of the knife barely picks up, and when it does, it's away from my fingers or what we're cutting. And we're gonna make a bit of a claw grip with your hands, like this. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna press the knife up against our knuckles like this, and it's gonna create a bit of a protective barrier. So I can't cut my fingers even if I wanted to, because, maybe you can see it better this way, my fingers are tucked, right? They're not out like this, where they could get sliced off. They're tucked in, and these big, hairy Italian knuckles are protecting my fingers from getting cut. So that's the basics, right? And what we're gonna do with this claw grip is we're gonna grab our onion or whatever we're cutting, right? And we're gonna press the knife against it. So before we cut this tail end off, we're gonna put the tip of the knife on the ground, we're gonna press it up against our knuckles, and then we're gonna just slice it clear off. When you slice off the tail end, try not to cut off too much of the onion, otherwise you're gonna lose some onion that you could cut, right? Now what's nice is we have a base to slice the onion in half, because that's gonna be our next step here. So you're gonna grip the onion, and you're gonna put your knife up against your knuckles here, right? You're gonna put your knife tip on the cutting board, and you're gonna simply press down and slice it in half. Now you've got two halves of the onion, right? We're gonna set one half aside. Now what you're gonna do is you're gonna peel this first layer of skin off. Sometimes I'll go as far as peeling off the first actual layer of onion too, depending on what state of ripe they are or what I'm cooking or how I'm cutting it. For instance, actually, I'm gonna peel off one more layer because you can see it's kind of getting a little dried out here. So I'm just gonna peel this off. And what you can do is with your onion scraps, you can set them in a freezer bag, you can freeze them, and once the bag loads up, you can make some stock out of it all, which is, maybe I'll do an episode on that in the future. But it's a good way to use your scraps of your veggies. Now we got this half, right? We've got a nice solid base for it to sit on, which is how we're gonna be slicing the first kind of cut. We're gonna use that grip. We're gonna put our knife against our knuckles, and we're gonna be slicing down. So the first way I'm gonna show you is just purely slicing. So we're gonna slice about 1/4 of an inch cut to like the half point, we'll call it, and then I'll show you another way to cut from there. So we're simply gonna do, I'm gonna do it really slow for you too, is as we slice, you can make it as thin or as thick as you'd like. And we're just gonna keep that rocking motion going. And that's how we create slices of onions like this. Now, our second way I'll show you on this one, we're gonna cut off the root side. Now we're gonna slice the onion this way, and I'm gonna show you the difference of what it looks like compared to the other way. So same thing, right? We're gonna use the skills that we just learned to make a bit of a different slice. So, as you can see, these look a bit different, right? The first version, you're gonna have these curved slices. The second version, maybe for more of a pickled onion vibe, depending on how you want your onion, it's gonna look a little bit different, right? You can kind of play with both methods and see which way you like for whatever reason, whatever you're cooking. Now I'll show you how to dice an onion. So to do this right, it's gonna be kind of hard for me to film. I might have to do it from a little bit of far angle. But basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna make slices from this angle. So this is kind of a smaller onion, so I'm only gonna do 2 1/4 inch slices. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna make rows, and then we're gonna make columns. So we're gonna cut 1/4 inch slices across the other way. So you'll see once it comes together, and when you do this, put the palm of your hand down so it's nice and sturdy. We're gonna do 2 cuts, and we don't wanna cut all the way through. We wanna leave a little bit left because this root end, it's gonna hold it together. So as you can see, since I did 2 slices, we have 3 rows. Now I'm gonna make columns. I'm gonna do 1/4 inch down this way to make columns. Simple as that, right? Now this way, you're not gonna be able to have the tip of your knife on the cutting board, obviously, but you can still use a bit of the claw method to protect your digits. So now, as you can see, we have all these columns here that once we slice across this way, it's going to become our 1/4 inch dice. Just like this, right? Pretty easy. Now, if we want to take it a step further and say, for instance, chop. This is a chop right here. A chop is basically so it doesn't look perfectly aligned. It's not all going to be a 1/4 inch. It's all going to be a bit different size, and that's why you call it a rough chop, right? But if we were to do a mince, that's one step further. We're basically going to do a rough chop, but for longer, right? And a little bit quicker. And as you can see, you're going to put your palm down still to kind of have some control over the knife. So you'll see different recipes call for different ways to slice something. And if you know these basic skills, it's going to elevate your cooking and save you a ton of time in the kitchen, because you're not going to be wondering why your recipe didn't turn out like the picture or whatever, why it didn't taste as good as you think it would have. It really comes down to these subtle differences. For instance, right, a minced onion is going to taste a lot more flavorful than a large chopped onion, right? So if we're doing bigger chunks of onions and we saute these onions compared to sauteing minced onions, this is going to be a lot more flavorful. Next, I'll show you how to cut a celery. Now, mine's a little bit on the last leg, but it's fine because I can show you an extra tip with it. So you can see this celery stick right here. It's a little discolored looking compared to these middle ones. It's starting to get a little brown. It's a little more floppy, right? We can set this aside, throw it in our bag of scraps, and use that for veggie stock in the future, because it's still going to be good, just not if we're using fresh celery. So we're going to cut off, like I just did there. You can rip it off. These little bits right here, we're not even going to worry about these. We're going to use those for our veggie scrap pile as well, because these, if we cut them up, they're going to cut up a little different than the rest, and they're also a little bendy anyways. And then you can see a lot of times celery will start to dry out or get a little brown on the tips. So we're just going to simply cut off the tip and push that aside. Now, there's a few different ways to cut celery, right? So I'll cut in half so I can show you a few different ways. Now, the first way I'll teach you how to cut celery is we're going to be slicing it down. So if you're making a, I don't know, like a chicken soup or something like that, for instance, and you need to make a mirepoix, this is the celery, how you cut it up that way. Pretty self-explanatory, you know, little 1/4 inch. You can cut it bigger if you're making a thicker, say, hearty vegetable soup or something like that, or a stew or whatever you're making. Another way is just celery sticks, right? Plain and simple. You can cut it in half or you can 1/4 it. And that's like if you're making a veggie tray. If you want to dip in some blue cheese, some ranch, whatever, you're having a super pull party or something like that, you just cut them up simply like that and they're good to go. Another way is a dice. So how we're going to do that, we're going to cut this in half. We're going to cut these in half again, so it'll be in quarters. Now we have these columns, right? Kind of similar to when we were cutting up the onion. Now this one's just a little bigger, so I'll probably cut it once more even. So we're gonna put these columns together now, and we're simply gonna dice them, right? You can dice them small for a 1/4 inch. You can do them a little bigger if you'd like. You can cut the columns bigger, you know, you can leave it in half. Just depends what you're cooking. But this is how you dice up celery. And this is how you make celery sticks. And this is how you slice celery. So a few different variations of celery. It's probably worth mentioning, before I cut all these veggies and before you eat them, give them a good thorough wash in your sink. Scrub them. If you have a little like scrubbing pad or something like that, even better. But all kinds of like little insects and dust and dirt, debris get on vegetables when they're sitting before you buy them, unless you're growing them in your backyard, which salute to you, that's awesome. So give them a nice thorough rinse and scrub before you eat them. So we're gonna do a bell pepper next, obviously. So for purposes of this demonstration, there's a bottom and there's a top. The top is gonna be the stem, the bottom is the other side. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna cut off the bottom first. And given there's a few ways to cut a bell pepper, this is what I've done ever since I cooked in the Coast Guard. So we're gonna cut off the bottom. Now we have a nice flat surface to cut these on, right? Now what we're gonna do, we're gonna cut off all 4 sides. If your bell pepper is a little wonky looking, you might get 5 sides out of it, which is, what is that, like a pentagon? I was gonna say a trapezoid. Anyways, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut off 4 sides here. Then what you're gonna see the inside, right? This is where all the seeds are. Now, don't throw out this part. We can still use this. This is a perfectly edible part. What you're gonna do is you're gonna make a cut that is in between the most inside skin of the bell pepper, we'll call it, and this part right here. And we're just gonna simply cut down on it. So see what I did there? None of this is really usable. You can put that in your veggie scrap pile. But this is perfectly usable. We just pop out the stem and you have all this bell pepper right here. This is a very important part of cutting bell pepper that's gonna make or break you saving time in the kitchen and doing it the most efficient way possible. Also, after you learn these skills, bell peppers in particular, I got a really good chicken peppers recipe. It's linked down below in my free e-cookbook. It's super tasty. So the important part here, there's the skin side, right? And there's the inside. We don't want the skin side, we want the inside to be cutting on. And you want to slant it, so if this was sitting up vertical, we're gonna go down this center line like this. And why we do that is because it's way easier to cut from the inside compared to the outside. Now, I've got a really sharp knife, so it might not look that hard, but what it does is it kind of shimmies the knife off a little bit and you might slip and hurt yourself, and it's just slower, just in general. I mean, think about it, if you're cutting through a wet piece of tissue paper compared to cutting through a piece of wood, it's just much easier, it's much smoother, so do it that way. So this is how you create a sliced bell pepper. Now, next, to dice, you already know how to do it probably. Same thing we've been doing, right? Just turn it. Now we've got diced bell pepper. Pretty easy, right? Next up is a big carrot, which is very common in a lot of recipes, right? There's a couple ends to this carrot. This is where the green part would have came out, right? Where the top of the carrot is. We're gonna cut off both little tops to it because it, kind of like the celery, it gets really dry and kind of brownish if it sits longer. So, optional. You can peel it or you can not peel it. Depending on what I'm making it, I'll peel it. If I'm making a hearty beef stew, for instance, it doesn't matter if I peel it or not. But if I'm making something raw where I'm not cooking the carrots, for instance, I'll peel it because otherwise the skin, it's not gonna taste as good, right? It's gonna give a different texture to it too, which we don't really want or need. So we're gonna throw the peeled carrot into our veggie scrap pile. Now, important thing with the carrot, right? Because they're a little awkward to cut. What works best to make a stable side is to stand it up vertically, and you're gonna just slice off a little piece. Oops, kind of messed up. Slice off a little piece so we have a flat surface to lean it on, and we're gonna throw that in a veggie scrap pile. Now we have a sturdy surface, right? We can do our little claw grip to it, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna make slices that are even. So we're gonna do 1/4-inch slices in this scenario. So you can put your knife tip down, you're gonna slice down. Now you have an even flatter surface, making it even more safe to cut. We're gonna use that as our new surface. Much sturdier now. We're gonna repeat what we just did there. We're gonna make 1/4-inch cuts, depending on what you wanna make. You can slice it smaller or bigger. Just be careful here because it is very slippery. So as you can see, we have our planks. They kind of look like wood planks, right? Now, all we can do here, simply cut them in half. Now we got our 1/4-inch sticks, and then if we want to dice them, we got our 1/4-inch dice now. Simple as that.